It began with a confession no one expected from the woman who once sat across from Meghan Markle and Prince Harry in the interview that shook the monarchy. For years, Oprah Winfrey remained silent, her expression unreadable whenever the explosive 2021 broadcast resurfaced. But now, in what insiders are calling a stunning reversal, Oprah has finally broken ranks, and what she allegedly admits threatens to unravel the entire narrative that captivated millions around the globe. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. When that interview first aired in March 2021, it detonated like a political earthquake across continents. Millions watched as Meghan and Harry laid bare accusations that sent shockwaves through palace walls and beyond them, shaking public trust in the monarchy to its core. In a single evening, sympathy shifted, loyalties fractured, and the carefully guarded image of Britain's royal institution was thrust into a storm unlike anything seen in decades. Oprah was not merely the interviewer that night, she was the trusted gatekeeper, the figure whose credibility gave every word extraordinary weight. At the time, her presence transformed the broadcast into something larger than television. It became a global reckoning. Viewers believed they were witnessing raw truth, unfiltered pain, and long-buried secrets finally spoken aloud. Yet as months turned into years, the cracks began to spread. Claims once accepted without hesitation were revisited, timelines were questioned, and details in Meghan's account began colliding with official records, archived reporting, and contradictory statements that refused to disappear quietly. What once looked like an untouchable testimony slowly became the subject of relentless scrutiny. Royal correspondents, investigative commentators, and even former supporters began pointing to troubling inconsistencies, moments in the interview where emotion had overwhelmed verification. Reports now suggest Oprah herself became increasingly uneasy as these discrepancies mounted behind the scenes. Media insiders whisper that private conversations within her circle raised painful questions. Had she been handed a version of events crafted more for impact than truth? And if so, how much had she unknowingly legitimized before a global audience? That is where the story takes its most unsettling turn. Sources close to the unfolding fallout claim Oprah has privately acknowledged that certain statements made during that historic exchange no longer align with what has since emerged. For a broadcaster whose reputation rests on discernment, that realization carries devastating implications. Because if the woman trusted to ask the hardest questions now believes she was misled, then the foundation beneath one of the most explosive royal interviews in modern history may already be collapsing. But if Oprah now believes she was deceived, the far more explosive question becomes this: what exactly did Meghan say that cannot withstand scrutiny anymore? At first, the claims landed like thunderclaps: racism allegations, secret suffering, palace cruelty. But as time passed, the details began to fracture under examination, and the narrative that once seemed untouchable started collapsing under its own contradictions. What had once been received as a devastating and definitive account of royal betrayal was now being pulled apart, piece by piece, each disputed detail exposing fresh fault lines in a story the world had been told to accept without question. One of the earliest cracks emerged around the claim that Meghan and Harry had secretly married 3 days before their televised royal wedding. The statement ignited headlines across the globe, framed as proof of a private love story hidden beneath royal spectacle. Yet official records quickly challenged that version of events. Marriage documents, legal requirements under British law, and statements from the Archbishop's office all pointed toward a different reality. What had sounded intimate and revealing suddenly became one of the first moments that forced audiences to ask whether emotion had overtaken accuracy. Then came the controversy surrounding Archie's title, another claim that struck an emotional nerve during the interview. Meghan suggested that royal rules had been manipulated in ways that denied her son status and protection. But royal historians and constitutional experts were swift to revisit the protocols governing titles, pointing to long-established conventions that predated Archie's birth by decades. Archived palace guidelines and prior precedents painted a far more complex picture than the one presented in that explosive broadcast. And with every clarification, public confidence in Meghan's narrative weakened further. Questions also intensified over allegations that the palace had abandoned Meghan during her darkest moments. Commentators began re-examining reports from palace staff, timelines of official engagements, and internal accounts already circulating in royal reporting circles. Journalists who had initially treated the interview as a landmark revelation now found themselves revisiting transcripts with sharper skepticism. Even veteran correspondents began asking the question that had once seemed almost forbidden. Had Oprah's team truly verified the most damaging claims before giving them a global platform? That question became increasingly impossible to ignore. The interview had not aired on a fringe network or through an unchecked rumor mill. It had been delivered through Oprah, a broadcaster whose reputation had long rested on trust, rigor, and authority. As fact-checkers, royal biographers, and investigative commentators continued uncovering inconsistencies, pressure mounted not only on Meghan, but on Oprah herself. The very legitimacy she lent the interview was now becoming part of the controversy, and whispers within media circles suggested that her silence was beginning to look less like neutrality and more like discomfort. Meanwhile, public sentiment was shifting. Supporters who once embraced Meghan's version of events without hesitation were beginning to hesitate, unsettled by the widening gap between televised claims and documented evidence. The emotional force of the interview remained undeniable, but emotion alone could no longer shield it from scrutiny. And as each contradiction surfaced, the central question became harder to escape. If so many details were unraveling, what else had not been true? And as the contradictions piled higher, Oprah reportedly found herself confronting a realization far more unsettling than public criticism alone. Behind closed doors, far from cameras and headlines, insiders claim Oprah's confidence in that historic interview began to erode, and what started as unease soon became something much heavier: regret. In the aftermath of the broadcast that once dominated global conversation, the applause faded, but the questions did not. As disputed claims multiplied and public scrutiny intensified, the woman who had helped bring Meghan's story to the world reportedly found herself confronting a painful possibility: that the trust she extended in that moment may have been misplaced. At first, the doubts were said to be quiet and deeply private. According to media insiders, Oprah began revisiting portions of the interview as contradictions surfaced in the months that followed. Statements that had once seemed emotionally compelling were now being dissected against timelines, records, and royal protocols that told more complicated stories. What had aired as raw testimony was no longer protected by the immediacy of emotion. It was being weighed against facts, and some of those facts were refusing to align. Those closest to Oprah's professional circle reportedly became increasingly uneasy as well. Members of her media team, along with trusted advisors, are said to have raised concerns about several claims that could not be independently verified at the time of broadcast. In elite broadcasting circles, that kind of uncertainty is dangerous. Oprah's reputation had been built over decades on the power of credibility, the belief that when she gave someone a platform, the truth had been tested before it reached the public. That foundation, insiders whisper, suddenly felt less secure. What made the situation more painful was the silence that followed. To many observers, Oprah's refusal to publicly revisit the interview looked like loyalty. But others now believe that silence may have reflected something far more complicated. Strategic restraint, born from mounting discomfort. To challenge Meghan openly would risk detonating a relationship already entangled in global controversy. Yet, to say nothing allowed doubts to deepen, leaving Oprah trapped between preserving personal trust and defending her own journalistic legacy. And that tension reportedly became impossible to ignore as criticism shifted toward Oprah herself. Commentators no longer focused only on Meghan's credibility. They began questioning the judgment behind the interview that had amplified her claims without visible challenge. For Oprah, the damage was no longer abstract. Speculation grew that the interview had begun to tarnish her carefully protected brand, turning what was once celebrated as a landmark television moment into a shadow over her legacy. And perhaps that is where the deepest regret took hold, not merely in what Meghan may have said, but in the realization that Oprah's name had become permanently tied to a narrative now clouded by doubt. The interview that once enhanced her authority was increasingly being recast as a moment where trust may have overruled caution. And what began as a global exclusive had become, for Oprah, a deeply personal reckoning she could no longer fully escape. But regret alone could have remained hidden forever, until a new wave of revelations forced the issue back into the spotlight. Just when the controversy seemed destined to fade into royal history, new disclosures dragged the interview back into the harsh glare of public judgment. And this time, even Oprah Winfrey could no longer remain untouched by the fallout. What many believed had settled into the archives as one of the monarchy's most explosive media reckonings was suddenly alive again, reopened by a cascade of fresh contradictions that forced old wounds back into public view. The silence that had protected the interview for years was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own unresolved questions. The reopening began with a series of later revelations memoirs, follow-up interviews, and shifting personal accounts that cast new doubt on statements once delivered as unquestionable truth. When Prince Harry released details in later public appearances and in his memoir, observers noticed troubling inconsistencies between his own recollections and what Meghan Markle had told Oprah in 2021. Claims that once seemed aligned now appeared fractured, with timelines diverging and emotional testimony no longer matching the couple's own evolving versions of events. What had once looked like a unified account was beginning to splinter in plain sight. Royal experts quickly seized on these discrepancies. Veteran commentators, constitutional historians, and palace correspondents returned to the interview transcript with renewed urgency, to revisiting questions that had never been fully answered the first time. Why did some central accusations remain unsupported by verifiable evidence? Why were critical allegations presented without documentation, witnesses, or institutional confirmation? Those unanswered questions, once buried beneath global sympathy, now resurfaced with greater force because the contradictions were no longer coming from outside critics. They were emerging from within the Sussexes' own narrative. That shift changed everything. Media analysts who had once defended the interview as a landmark act of truth-telling began reframing it in harsher terms. The story was no longer centered on victim testimony alone. It was becoming a broader crisis of credibility. No commentators openly questioned whether Oprah's platform had been used to amplify claims that had not been sufficiently challenged, and whether her deference in that historic conversation had allowed emotional persuasion to replace factual rigor. Each missing piece of evidence deepened the sense that the original interview had left too many essential questions unasked. Public pressure intensified with startling speed. Across media circles, the focus turned toward Oprah herself, with growing calls for her to clarify whether she now believed she had been manipulated. Her silence, once interpreted as discretion, was now being read as evasion. For a broadcaster whose authority was built on trust, the stakes had become deeply personal. The interview was no longer simply Meghan and Harry's controversy. It had become Oprah's reckoning as well. See, and the longer she withheld comment, the louder the demands became. What had once been hailed as a fearless act of revelation was now being re-examined as something far more unstable. A narrative built on emotion, challenged by contradiction, and haunted by unanswered truths. The royal wound had reopened, and this time it threatened to expose not only the fractures in Meghan's story, but the vulnerability of everyone who helped tell it. And as pressure mounted from every side, Oprah reportedly faced the one decision she had avoided for years: whether to admit she had been misled. Then came the moment that insiders say changed the entire equation. Oprah Winfrey, in private conversations now leaking into public view, allegedly admitted what royal watchers had suspected for years, that Meghan Markle had not been fully truthful. For a controversy already trembling under the strain of contradiction, this was the tremor that threatened to bring the entire structure down. Because this was no longer a matter of outside criticism, hostile press, or palace defenders challenging Meghan's claims. This time, the doubt was said to be coming from the very woman whose platform had transformed those claims into global headlines. According to reports circulating within media and royal circles, Oprah has privately acknowledged that she was not given the complete truth during that now infamous interview. The allegation is as explosive as it is consequential. If true, it means the world's most influential interviewer may have conducted one of the most watched royal conversations in history, while lacking crucial facts behind the emotional testimony she broadcast to millions. That possibility has sent a wave of shock through commentators who once viewed Oprah as the unquestioned anchor of credibility in the Sussex saga. At the heart of this alleged admission lies a deeper problem. Several of the interview's most damaging statements were presented without documentary evidence, corroborating records, or immediate challenge. At the time, emotion carried the narrative forward with overwhelming force. But in hindsight, those omissions now appear far more serious. Critics argue that claims involving royal protocol, family conduct, and institutional actions should never have been allowed to stand without rigorous verification. What once felt like compassionate listening is now being re-examined as a moment where trust may have replaced scrutiny. This revelation also transforms Oprah's role in a dramatic and unexpected way. For years, detractors accused her of enabling Meghan's narrative by offering a stage free of meaningful resistance. But if Oprah herself was misled, then the story shifts sharply. She is no longer merely the broadcaster who amplified a disputed account, but potentially another casualty of deception. That reframing has triggered fierce debate. Some royal commentators now express sympathy for Oprah, arguing that she too may have been drawn into a carefully constructed narrative whose weaknesses only became visible after the damage was done. The reaction has been immediate and unforgiving. Former supporters of Meghan, once unwavering in their defense, are beginning to distance themselves as the credibility crisis deepens. In media circles, the alleged admission has become a symbolic breaking point, the moment when Oprah's own reputation intersects fatally with Meghan's unraveling public story. If Oprah is indeed stepping back from the Sussex narrative, even quietly, it signals something profound. The alliance that once gave Meghan extraordinary moral authority may be fracturing beyond repair. And that fracture carries enormous symbolic weight. Oprah was never just an interviewer in this saga. She was the trusted witness who helped define how the world interpreted Meghan's pain. If she is now pulling away, it sends an unmistakable message that belief itself is being withdrawn. For Meghan, that may be the harshest blow of all, because once the most powerful voice in her corner begins to doubt, the entire narrative begins to lose its shield. And yet the most devastating consequence may not be for Oprah at all, but for Meghan, whose public image now faces its greatest reckoning yet. For Meghan Markle, the stakes have never been higher, because if Oprah Winfrey, the architect of her most powerful public platform, has truly turned away, then the foundation beneath her carefully built narrative may be crumbling beyond repair. What was once presented as a fearless personal testimony is now being re-examined through a harsher lens, and the consequences for Meghan are becoming impossible to ignore. The very interview that elevated her voice to unprecedented global influence may now be the event that defines the collapse of her public credibility. For years, Meghan's strength in the public arena rested on one powerful advantage: trust. She had positioned herself as a woman who broke silence at enormous personal cost, and millions believed her because the emotional force of her testimony felt undeniable. But trust, once fractured, is rarely restored without damage. As allegations of inconsistencies continue to gather force, her relationship with audiences, journalists, and media institutions is entering dangerous territory. Networks and interviewers who once saw her as a compelling and sympathetic figure may now approach any future appearance with greater caution, sharper scrutiny, and less willingness to accept claims at face value. That shift threatens far more than public sympathy. It raises profound questions about Meghan's long-term credibility on the global stage. Future interviews, whether personal, political, or philanthropic, will now carry the shadow of doubt. Every statement risks being filtered through the memory of contradictions already exposed. In celebrity culture, perception can be as powerful as truth, and the perception now gaining momentum is deeply damaging. That Meghan's most defining narrative may have been built on claims too fragile to survive verification. Meanwhile, within royal circles, a very different narrative is taking hold. The British royal family, once battered by the emotional impact of the Oprah interview, is increasingly seen by some observers as quietly vindicated. Their refusal to engage publicly in prolonged retaliation is being reinterpreted not as weakness, but as discipline. The phrase, "recollections may vary," once criticized as evasive, now carries a sharper resonance for commentators who believe time has exposed what the palace never openly challenged. So the fallout also extends directly to Prince Harry. His memoir and later interviews, intended to reinforce the Sussex version of events, have instead intensified scrutiny by introducing new contradictions. In trying to strengthen their shared narrative, Harry may have inadvertently weakened it, leaving both himself and Meghan trapped in a web of conflicting accounts that critics continue to dissect with relentless precision. What was meant to clarify has instead deepened uncertainty. Perhaps the most striking transformation is in public discourse itself. Where sympathy once dominated, skepticism is rapidly replacing it. The broader implications reach beyond Meghan alone, touching the entire culture of high-profile celebrity interviews, built on emotionally charged but insufficiently challenged testimony. But the Sussex interview is no longer just a royal scandal. It has become a cautionary tale about what happens when narrative power outruns factual certainty. And as the dust settles, one haunting question remains. Was the most famous royal interview of the decade not a revelation, but the greatest illusion of all? For years, Buckingham Palace said almost nothing, choosing silence over spectacle. But now, as Meghan Markle's claims face renewed collapse, that silence is beginning to look less like weakness and more like strategy. In the immediate aftermath of the Oprah interview, the monarchy stood under an avalanche of condemnation, accused in headlines across the world and judged in the court of public emotion before any evidence had fully settled. Yet while outrage raged beyond palace gates, and the institution responded with a discipline that many at the time mistook for fragility. What seemed passive then is now being reinterpreted as something far more deliberate, a calculated refusal to fight a war of emotion with emotion. At the center of that restraint was one short phrase that has since taken on new meaning. Recollections may vary. When the palace first issued those words, critics mocked them as cold, evasive, and insufficient against the gravity of the allegations. But with contradictions continuing to emerge in Meghan and Harry's narrative, that carefully measured statement now appears almost prophetic in hindsight. It neither escalated the conflict nor surrendered to it. Instead, it planted a quiet seed of doubt that time itself has steadily watered. Within royal circles, reports suggest there is a growing sense of vindication. Palace insiders, once forced into defensive silence while accusations dominated headlines, now find themselves watching as public scrutiny shifts toward the Sussex narrative. The monarchy's greatest strength may have been its refusal to engage in open retaliation. By resisting the temptation to counterattack publicly, the institution preserved something more powerful than rebuttal: the appearance of steadiness under siege. In a scandal fueled by emotional declarations, silence became its most potent weapon. That reversal has also altered public perception of senior royals who were once caught in the storm of blame. Figures such as Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, heavily scrutinized in the aftermath of the interview, are now benefiting from a renewed wave of sympathy. Their refusal to engage in public mudslinging has strengthened their image as stable custodians of duty, particularly as Meghan's credibility crisis deepens. Where once they were overshadowed by accusation, they are increasingly viewed as symbols of continuity and restraint. This shift reveals something deeper about the monarchy itself. The royal family has survived generations of scandal not by winning every public argument, but by playing a longer game than their critics. Media sensationalism burns brightly but briefly. Institutions built on patience endure by waiting for time to expose what outrage cannot. In this case, the palace did not need to destroy Meghan's narrative. It only needed to outlast it. And as the contradictions surrounding the Oprah interview continue to surface, that long-game approach now appears to have preserved the monarchy's authority in ways few predicted. Still, vindication does not erase damage. The interview fractured trust, deepened family divisions, and left wounds that no statement, however carefully crafted, can fully heal. Even as the palace regains moral ground, the cost of that silence remains etched into the family's modern history. A reminder that surviving scandal is not the same as escaping it unscarred. Yet even as the palace regains ground, the deeper legacy of the interview leaves scars that neither side may ever fully erase. What was once hailed as a fearless truth-telling moment may now be remembered as one of the most controversial, televised reckonings in modern royal history, a broadcast whose consequences continue to echo far beyond that California garden set. And the interview that brought Meghan Markle and Prince Harry before Oprah Winfrey did more than dominate headlines for a single news cycle. It altered the course of royal media history. It redrew loyalties, deepened family fractures, and forced the monarchy into one of the most turbulent public crises of the modern age. Yet as time has peeled back the layers of that moment, the meaning of the broadcast itself has begun to change. In its earliest days, the interview was framed as a defining act of courage, a rare and intimate challenge to one of the world's oldest institutions. It was treated as a historic rupture, a televised confession that exposed hidden pain beneath royal ceremony. But now, Oprah's alleged private admission has cast that same broadcast in a far darker light. And if the interviewer herself believes she was not given the full truth, then the event can no longer stand simply as a landmark revelation. It becomes something far more troubling, a global media spectacle built, at least in part, on claims now shadowed by doubt. That transformation carries lasting consequences for Meghan's legacy. No matter how many future projects, appearances, or reinventions may follow, her public identity is now inseparably bound to the question of credibility. The interview was meant to define her as a truth-teller who challenged a powerful institution. Instead, history may come to remember it as the moment that placed her honesty under permanent suspicion. For a figure whose influence has relied so heavily on moral authority, that is a burden not easily escaped. The fallout extends beyond the royal family and beyond Meghan herself. This saga has become a cautionary tale for journalism in the age of emotionally charged testimony. The Oprah interview demonstrated the enormous power of celebrity narratives delivered without immediate challenge, and the danger when emotional persuasion outpaces factual verification. It has exposed how quickly public trust can be mobilized and how painfully it collapses when contradictions emerge. In that sense, the ultimate casualty may not be any single reputation, but trust itself. Trust in interviews, in institutions, in narratives presented as truth before evidence has caught up. And that may be the most haunting legacy of all. The divide between perception and reality, between story and fact, has rarely been so starkly displayed on such a global stage. Millions watched, believing they were witnessing unfiltered truth. Years later, many are left wondering whether they were instead watching the construction of a narrative too fragile to survive scrutiny. The monarchy will endure, the headlines will fade, and public attention will shift elsewhere. But the shadow cast by that interview will remain, a permanent reminder of how powerfully stories can shape history before history has decided whether they were true. Because in the end, the most devastating royal bombshell was never what was said on camera, but what may finally have been admitted after the cameras stopped rolling. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.